You spent 18 months planning the most important day of your life only for the girls who made your past a living hell to crash the reception and tear it all down. They spilled the wine. They destroyed the cake. They thought they had won. But what these entitled mean girls didn't know was that my unassuming groom was hiding a massive secret. And when the heavy oak doors suddenly bolted shut, they realized they weren't dealing with a helpless bride. They had just triggered a Royal Secret Service lockdown. The morning of the wedding, the air at Oheka Castle was crisp, smelling faintly of the Atlantic Ocean and thousands of imported white hydrangeas. Clara Brooke stood by the towering windows of the bridal suite, looking out over the manicured French gardens. She was a girl from a modest suburb in Ohio, a graphic designer who had scrapped and saved for years. Today she was marrying Adrian. Adrian Christian Valdemar was to Clara and everyone else in their New York social circle a quietly successful investment analyst at J.P. Morgan. He was handsome in an understated way, always preferring a well-worn barber jacket over flashy designer labels. He drove a 5-year-old Volvo. He made Clara coffee every morning. He was perfect, but Adrian's past came with baggage, and that baggage had a name: Brittany Carmichael. Brittany was a New York socialite whose family practically owned the Upper East Side. She had dated Adrian briefly in college, a pairing her parents had desperately orchestrated. When Adrian respectfully ended it, Brittany's bruised ego mutated into a lifelong vendetta. To her, Clara was a peasant who had stolen her rightful prize. Alongside her two loyal disciples, Jessica Hayes and Amanda Rollins, Brittany had spent the last 3 years making Clara's life miserable at every charity gala, holiday party, and social event in the city. Clara hadn't wanted to invite them. "Adrian, please," she had begged 6 months ago, staring at the guest list. "Brittany will ruin it. She literally accidentally tripped a waiter onto my dress at the Met Gala after party." Adrian had sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "Clara, my darling, her father is a major client of the firm. It's politics. If we snub them, it creates a nightmare at work. I promise you they will be relegated to table 42 in the darkest corner of the ballroom. They won't even breathe your air." Clara had reluctantly agreed. It was a compromise for the man she loved. She turned away from the window, her bridesmaids bustling around her. Her dress, a breathtaking custom Oscar de la Renta ball gown with intricate lace applique, hung on a velvet hanger. She had spent a third of her wedding budget on it. "You look stunning," her maid of honor Lily said, handing her a glass of Dom Perignon. "And don't worry about the Carmichael coven. Security has been instructed to keep an eye on them." But as Clara slipped into her dress, a strange feeling washed over her. She had noticed odd details in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Adrian's passport, which she had accidentally glimpsed, had a different cover than the standard US or British passport. Whenever she asked about his family in Europe, he was famously vague, claiming they were old-fashioned farmers with a bit of land. And then there was the security detail. Adrian had insisted on hiring a private firm called Aegis International. He claimed it was standard for high-net-worth clients from his firm who were attending. But the men standing in the hallways with coiled earpieces looked less like event bouncers and more like military operatives. The ceremony went off without a hitch. The string quartet played warped. Bach. Clara walked down the aisle, and Adrian looked at her with tears in his eyes. They exchanged Cartier bands. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt a surge of triumphant relief. She had done it. She was Mrs. Valdemar. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the 300 guests transitioned to the grand ballroom for the reception, the illusion of perfection began to fracture. The doors to the cocktail hour swung open, and walking through them, late and entirely unapologetic, was Brittany Carmichael. Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. Brittany, Jessica, and Amanda had completely ignored the black tie dress code. Instead, they were all wearing floor-length, shimmering ivory gowns. They looked exactly like brides. "Oh, Clara, darling." Brittany purred, gliding across the marble floor with a flute of champagne in her hand. Her ivory silk dress clung to her frame, the train dragging slightly behind her. "We are so sorry we missed the ceremony." Traffic from the Hamptons was just dreadful. Clara gripped Adrian's arm. "You're wearing white," she said, her voice tight. "White." Brittany laughed, a high piercing sound that made heads turn. "Va? Oh, sweetie, this is champagne mist. Totally different. Besides, you know I look completely washed out in dark colors. You wouldn't want me to look ugly in your background photos, would you?" Adrian stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Brittany, you need to go find your seats. Now." His tone was dangerously low, a voice Clara rarely heard him use. Brittany's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning in full force. "Of course, Adrian. Congratulations. You look like you." She gave Clara one last sweeping, judgmental look and sashayed away, Jessica and Amanda trailing behind her like synchronized swimmers. The cocktail hour was a tense affair. Clara tried to focus on the well wishes of Adrian's colleagues and her family, but her eyes kept darting to the corner where the mean girls were holding court. They were whispering loudly, pointing at the floral arrangements and rolling their eyes. When the doors to the main ballroom finally opened, chaos erupted. The event planner, a frantic woman named Beatrice, rushed up to Clara and Adrian, her clipboard shaking. "Mr. Valdemar, Mrs. Valdemar, we have a problem. The escort cards." Clara rushed into the ballroom. The meticulously arranged table of calligraphy escort cards had been completely scrambled. Cards were thrown everywhere, some dropped into the water features, others ripped in half. Guests were wandering aimlessly, confused and frustrated. Table 1, reserved for Clara's parents and Adrian's mysterious elderly aunt, who had flown in from Europe, was suddenly occupied by Brittany, Jessica, Amanda, and their dates. "I'm so sorry," Beatrice stammered. "I turned my back for 2 minutes to check on the catering staff, and when I came back..." Clara felt tears pricking her eyes. "Make them move," she whispered to Adrian. "Please." Adrian signaled to one of the Aegis security guards, a tall, imposing man named Vance, whilst the guard's name was Davies. Davies nodded sharply and approached table 1. Clara watched from a distance as Davies spoke to Brittany. Brittany crossed her arms, shook her head dramatically, and pointed to a fake, crudely written place card she had seemingly brought herself. It was a standoff, but to avoid making a massive scene, before the first dance, Adrian intervened. "Let them stay," Adrian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Move my aunt to table 2. Put Clara's parents with her. Let the girls have table 1 for now." "Adrian, no," Clara protested. "They're ruining it." "Clara, look at me," Adrian said, taking her hands. His blue eyes were intensely focused. "I promise you they will not get away with this. But if we drag them out kicking and screaming right now, it's all anyone will remember. Let them dig their own graves." Reluctantly, Clara agreed. The seating was hastily rearranged, and the dinner service began. Clara and Adrian took their seats at the sweetheart table, elevated slightly above the dance floor. For a brief moment, things settled. The first course, a delicate lobster bisque, was served. The band played soft jazz. Then it was time for the toasts. Lily gave a beautiful, tear-jerking speech. Adrian's best man, a stoic British man named Edward, gave a brief, highly formal toast that ended with a toast to the crown and the couple. Clara thought it was a weird figure of speech but didn't dwell on it. Then, before the band could transition back to music, the microphone shrieked with feedback. Standing in the center of the dance floor, holding the stolen microphone, was Brittany Carmichael. "Hi everyone," Brittany slurred slightly, her cheeks flushed. "I know I'm not officially on the schedule, but as one of Adrian's closest and oldest friends, I just had to say a few words." The room fell, dead silent. Clara's blood ran cold. "When Adrian and I were together in college," Brittany continued, pacing the floor, "we used to talk about the future. We talked about summering in Saint-Tropez, skiing in Gstaad. Adrian was wild back then. Honestly, half the things we did I can't even say in front of polite company. But you know boys grow up. They settle down. They find someone comfortable, someone safe. And Clara, honey, you are the safest bet in the world." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara sat frozen, humiliated. "So here's to Adrian. Brittany raised her glass, looking directly at Clara with a vicious, triumphant smirk, for finally settling for a quiet, mediocre life in the suburbs. Cheers. Adrian stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. But before he could even signal security, the real nightmare began. As Brittany handed the microphone to a stunned waiter and strutted back to table 1, Jessica and Amanda were waiting with fresh drinks. Clara was shaking. She couldn't look at her family. She couldn't look at Adrian. "I need to go to the restroom," Clara choked out, gathering the massive skirts of her Oscar de la Renta gown. "Clara, wait." Adrian reached for her, but she was already rushing away, dodging bewildered guests. As Clara navigated the labyrinth of tables, a waiter holding a massive silver tray of red wine glasses suddenly collided with her. But it wasn't an accident. Clara saw Amanda's stiletto jut out from under the tablecloth, tripping the poor waiter. With a shattering crash, the tray went airborne. 3 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon splashed directly across the bodice and skirt of Clara's pristine lace gown. Clara shrieked, the cold liquid seeping through the expensive fabric. The entire ballroom gasped. The waiter was on his knees, apologizing profusely, almost in tears. Clara looked up and saw Amanda and Jessica stifling giggles behind their napkins. Brittany wasn't even trying to hide her smirk. "Oh no," Brittany called out loudly. "The cheap fabric just soaked it right up, didn't it?" Clara couldn't take it anymore. She hitched up her ruin-stained dress and sprinted out of the ballroom, down the long corridor and into the massive bridal suite, slamming the heavy mahogany door behind her. She collapsed onto the velvet settee, sobbing uncontrollably. The dress was ruined. The reception was hijacked. Her perfect day had been dismantled piece by piece by women who simply hated her for existing. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Clara looked up, expecting Lily or Adrian. Instead, it was Brittany alone. She slipped inside and locked the door behind her with a sharp click. "You know, crying makes your nose really red," Brittany said, leaning against the doorframe, admiring her own nails. "Not very bridal." "Get out," Clara whispered, her voice raw. "I just wanted to check on you. It's hard, isn't it, realizing you don't belong?" Brittany walked slowly into the room, her eyes sweeping over the lavish suite. "You really thought you could play dress up and pretend to be one of us? You secured the ring, sure. Adrian's a nice guy, he felt sorry for you. But you will never fit into his world. My father's firm handles his accounts. We know his pedigree. You are a footnote, Clara. I told you to get out." Clara stood up, her fists clenched. The wine stain on her dress looked like a gaping wound. "Or what?" Brittany challenged, stepping directly into Clara's personal space. "You're going to throw me out. This is my world, Clara. These are my venues, my people. Adrian will realize it eventually. He's probably out there right now, apologizing to my father for your little dramatic exit." Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from the hallway outside. Brittany jumped, startled. What was that? Another crash followed, louder this time, like heavy furniture being thrown. Then came the sound of screaming from the main ballroom. Not drunken party screams, panicked, terrifying screams. Brittany scoffed, trying to regain her composure. "Probably one of your tacky relatives breaking The heavy mahogany door of the bridal suite didn't just open, it was violently kicked off its hinges." Brittany shrieked and leaped back. 4 men dressed in immaculately tailored black suits stormed into the room. They weren't the standard Aegis event security. These men moved with terrifying synchronized precision. They wore earpieces, and 2 of them held what looked distinctly like compact submachine guns lowered at their sides. "Ma'am, get back," one of the men barked, pointing a gloved hand not at Clara but at Brittany. "Excuse me," Brittany screeched, her bravado returning. "Do you know who my father is? You can't just break in here with weapons. I'm calling the police." "The police have no jurisdiction here," a cold, authoritative voice rang out from the hallway. Adrian stepped over the splintered remains of the door, but he didn't look like Adrian, the investment analyst. His suit jacket was off. His posture was rigid, commanding. Behind him, the hallway was lined with more men in black suits, completely locking down the perimeter. Clara stared at him, bewildered. "Adrian, what is going on?" Adrian rushed to Clara, completely ignoring Brittany. He placed his hands on Clara's shoulders, his eyes scanning her frantically for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did she touch you?" "No, I'm fine, but my dress." "Adrian, who are these men?" Adrian turned his head slightly toward the lead security agent. "Status, Commander." "Code Sovereign is active, Your Highness." The agent replied, bowing his head slightly. "The perimeter is secure. The threat in the ballroom has been neutralized." Clara's breath hitched. "Your Highness!" Brittany burst out laughing, though it sounded shrill and nervous. "Your Highness, what is this, some kind of weird role-play? Adrian, call off your rent-a-cops before my dad sues this entire hotel into the ground." Adrian slowly turned to face Brittany. The warmth that usually resided in his eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a glacial, inherited authority that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Your father," Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet, "is currently being detained by Interpol in the wine cellar, along with Jessica, Amanda, and the waiter you bribed." Brittany's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" "You assumed I worked for J.P. Morgan because that is the cover my family provided for me when I chose to live in New York." Adrian took a step toward her. The security agents subtly shifted, forming a protective wall in front of Clara. "You assumed your father's wealth gave you immunity. What you didn't know, Brittany, is that your father's investments have been under investigation by European intelligence for money laundering for the past 2 years. And the only reason you were invited to this wedding was so we could gather all of his associates in one room." Brittany stumbled backward, hitting the vanity table. "You're lying. You're a finance bro." "I am Adrian Christian Valdemar," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Duke of Holstein, third in line to the Danish throne, and you just assaulted the future Duchess." The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt suffocating. Clara looked from her ruined, wine-stained dress to the man she had just married. The doors to the hotel slammed shut in the distance, followed by the heavy mechanical lock of a total security lockdown. The mean girls had wanted to ruin a wedding. Instead, they had trapped themselves in a royal fortress, and the game was finally over. The silence in the bridal suite was absolute, broken only by the erratic, shallow breathing of Brittany Carmichael. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her hands trembling as she stared at the man she had dated for 3 years, loved deeply, and married just hours ago. Duke of Holstein, third in line to the Danish throne. "Adrian." Clara's voice was a fragile whisper. "Is this a joke? Because if this is a joke to get back at them, it's going way too far." Adrian's gaze softened as he looked at his bride. The icy, commanding aura he had projected toward Brittany melted away, leaving the man who made her coffee every morning. He took a slow step toward her, his hands open. "Clara, my love, I swear to you I'm exactly the man you married. My heart, my life, my devotion to you, none of that is a lie. But my name, my family, I couldn't tell you, not until today." "Why?" Clara demanded, the shock morphing into a dizzying confusion. 3 years, Adrian, you drove a beat-up Volvo. A Volvo with ballistic armor and reinforced glass, interjected the lead security agent, stepping forward with a crisp nod. "Commander Sullivan, Your Grace, Royal Protection Command. We've been trailing you both since your second date at that diner in Brooklyn." Clara swayed, slightly gripping the back of the velvet settee. You had me followed." "Protected," Adrian corrected gently, catching her arm to steady her. "Clara, when you're part of the royal family, you don't get to just move to Manhattan and play normal. The Crown allowed me to pursue my career at J.P. Morgan under the strict condition of anonymity. If the press found out I was here, if the wrong people found out, it would have been a security nightmare. I wanted to tell you. God, I wanted to tell you every single day. But my grandmother, the Queen, explicitly forbade it until the ink was dry on our marriage certificate. Royal protocol dictates that unbetrothed partners cannot be burdened with state secrets." Brittany, who had been pressed against the vanity table looking like a cornered animal, suddenly let out a frantic, breathless laugh. No. This is insane. You're lying. My father manages your portfolio." Adrian's head snapped toward her, his expression returning to absolute zero. "Your father, Richard Carmichael, manages a decoy portfolio set up by the Danish Ministry of Finance and the FBI's white-collar crime division." Brittany lunged for her Judith Lieber clutch resting on a nearby chair, fumbling wildly for her phone. "I'm calling him. I'm calling my dad right now." You're all going to be arrested for kidnapping." Before she could even unlock the screen, one of the agents moved with terrifying speed, snatching the phone from her hand and dropping it into a Faraday bag. "Hey!" Brittany shrieked. "Your father cannot answer the phone, Miss Carmichael," Commander Sullivan stated plainly, consulting a tablet that had been handed to him by a subordinate. As of 19 minutes ago, he was apprehended in the Oaxaca Castle wine cellar while attempting to destroy physical ledgers. Adrian stepped toward Brittany, his height and authoritative posture casting a long shadow over her. "Did you really think I didn't know how you treated Clara? Do you think I was blind to the accidental spills, the passive-aggressive comments, the exclusion from social events? I saw it all." Clara looked at him, her heart aching. "Then why did you invite them, Adrian? Why put me through this today?" "Because, my darling," Adrian said, turning back to Clara with a look of profound apology, "we needed Richard Carmichael on American soil, surrounded by his co-conspirators in a heavily controlled environment where he couldn't flee. A royal wedding, even an undercover one, requires top-tier security. We used Aegis International as a front to deploy a joint task force." Commander Sullivan stepped forward, addressing Brittany directly. "For the past 2 years, Richard Carmichael has been utilizing his Manhattan investment firm to launder millions for a syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. We have documented proof of wire fraud, moving illicit funds through shell companies in Delaware and the Seychelles, embezzlement, siphoning client funds to cover staggering losses in offshore accounts, conspiracy to commit fraud involving multiple members of his firm, including the fathers of Jessica Hayes and Amanda Rollins." Brittany's knees finally gave out. She collapsed onto the plush carpet, her expensive ivory champagne mist gown pooling around her. The smug, untouchable mean girl was gone, replaced by a trembling, hyperventilating shell. "You use my wedding as a sting operation," Clara asked, the reality crashing down on her. "I use my royal authority to protect our future and to completely dismantle the people who tried to ruin yours," Adrian said. He reached out and gently touched the massive red wine stain on her Oscar de la Renta dress. "I am so sorry about the dress. And the microphone stunt. I wanted to intervene, but Sullivan insisted we wait for Richard to access the safe in the cellar." Clara looked at the wine stain, then at Brittany, sobbing on the floor, and then at the heavily armed royal guards securing the perimeter of her bridal suite. The sheer absurdity of it all bubbled up in her chest. She had spent 18 months stressing over napkins and floral arrangements, entirely unaware she was the centerpiece of an international counterterrorism and fraud operation. "Okay," Clara breathed out, her posture straightening. "Okay, what happens now?" Adrian smiled, a glimmer of deep pride in his eyes. He had known Clara was strong, but watching her process this colossal revelation with such rapid composure proved she was born to wear a crown. "Now," Adrian said, offering her his arm, "we go back to our reception. But first you need to change. I believe Lily brought the backup." Clara's backup dress was intended for dancing, a sleek, minimalist, white silk slip gown by Monique Lhuillier. It lacked the royal grandeur of the ruined ball gown, but as she slipped it on, she felt a different kind of armor settling over her. As a final touch, Adrian removed a small velvet box from his suit pocket. Inside rested a breathtaking antique diamond brooch in the shape of a crest. "The Valdemar family crest," Adrian murmured, pinning it carefully to the thin silk strap of her dress. "Given to my great-grandmother, it officially marks you under the protection of the crown. Are you ready, Your Grace?" "Your Grace." The title sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Let's go." The walk back to the grand ballroom was entirely different from her desperate flight 10 minutes earlier. They were flanked by 4 royal agents. Ahead of them, Commander Sullivan spoke rapidly into his wrist microphone, coordinating the lockdown. When the heavy double doors of the ballroom were pushed open, the scene inside was utterly surreal. The music had stopped. The 300 guests were seated, speaking in hushed, terrified whispers. The standard Aegis security guards had dropped their event staff facades. They were now visibly armed and stationed at every exit. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a bright, unforgiving light on the center of the dance floor. There, kneeling on the polished wood, with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, were Richard Carmichael, two other older men Clara recognized as the fathers of Jessica and Amanda, and the waiter who had accidentally tripped. Sitting on chairs nearby, weeping uncontrollably and mascara-streaked, were Jessica Hayes and Amanda Rollins. As Adrian and Clara entered, Commander Sullivan's voice boomed over the room's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain in your seats. The premises are under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in conjunction with Interpol and the Danish Royal Security Service. The lockdown will be lifted once the primary targets are fully processed." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Clara's parents, sitting at table 2, looked as though they might faint. Adrian guided Clara down the grand staircase, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. The guests watched in stunned silence as the unassuming, quiet investment analyst walked with the unmistakable lethal grace of royalty. They stopped right in front of the dance floor. Richard Carmichael, a usually red-faced, booming man, known for bullying waitstaff and buying his way out of trouble, looked up at Adrian with pure venom. "You little rat," Carmichael spat, struggling against his plastic restraints. "You set me up. I trusted you with my accounts." "You trusted an alias Richard," Adrian replied, his voice echoing coldly in the silent room. "You trusted Adrian Vance, a fabricated identity designed by intelligence agencies to look exactly like the kind of hungry, morally flexible junior analyst you love to exploit. You took the bait. You funneled $50 million of cartel money through the accounts I managed." "It's entrapment," Carmichael yelled. "It's a federal indictment," a new voice called out. A woman in a sharp navy pantsuit stepped forward from the shadows of the catering wing, flashing an FBI badge. "Special Agent Ramirez, we have the ledgers you tried to burn in the cellar, Mr. Carmichael. We also have the offshore routing numbers. You're looking at 20 years minimum." Clara watched mesmerized. She turned her attention to the side, where Jessica and Amanda were hyperventilating. "Adrian, please," Jessica wailed, her ivory dress smeared with dirt from sitting on the floor. "We didn't know anything about the money, we just came for the wedding." "You came to humiliate my wife," Adrian corrected, his tone razor sharp. "You wore white. You destroyed the seating arrangements. You bribed a waiter to ruin a $30,000 gown." "It was Brittany's idea," Amanda shrieked instantly, throwing her supposed best friend under the bus. "She paid the waiter $5,000. She brought the fake escort cards. We just followed her, I swear." Right on cue, the ballroom doors opened again. Two royal guards escorted a completely broken Brittany Carmichael into the room. She wasn't fighting anymore. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was ruined, and she stared blankly ahead. When she saw her father kneeling on the dance floor in zip ties, she let out a pathetic whimper, but she didn't run to him. Clara stepped forward. Adrian instinctively moved to block her, but Clara gently pushed his arm down. She didn't need him to fight this particular battle. Clara walked up to the trio of mine girls. The entire ballroom held its breath. For 3 years, Clara started, her voice steady and clear, projecting across the room. "You made me feel like I was completely worthless. You mocked my clothes, my job, my family. You told everyone I was a gold digger who trapped Adrian." Brittany looked away, unable to meet Clara's eyes. "You thought power was about how much money your father had, or how cruel you could be to people who couldn't fight back," Clara continued. She touched the royal crest pinned to her dress. "But true power doesn't have to announce itself by ruining other people. It doesn't have to wear a white dress to someone else's wedding to feel important." Clara leaned in, slightly, lowering her voice so only Brittany and her disciples could hear. "You are leaving my wedding now, and the next time you see Adrian and me, it won't be at a charity gala in Manhattan. It will be on the international news while you visit your fathers in federal prison. Goodbye, Brittany." The extraction was highly coordinated and remarkably swift. Within 15 minutes, the FBI and Interpol liaisons had hauled Richard Carmichael and his associates out through the kitchen loading docks, avoiding the front entrance where inevitably local police and soon the press would gather. Brittany, Jessica, and Amanda were not arrested. They had not committed federal fraud, but Commander Sullivan happily ordered them escorted off the property. The visual of the three mean girls shivering in their inappropriate ivory gowns, being marched out the back door by heavily armed guards, was an image Clara knew she would cherish for the rest of her life. Once the doors clicked shut behind them, a heavy, awkward silence fell over the remaining 290 guests. What happens to a wedding reception after a federal sting operation and a royal revelation? Adrian took a deep breath, adjusted his cuffs, and signaled to the event planner Beatrice, who was hiding behind an ice sculpture of a swan, clutching her clipboard for dear life. "Beatrice," Adrian called out gently, "I believe we are behind schedule for the cake cutting." Beatrice blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Yes, Mr. Val, Your Highness." Adrian turned to the crowd. He walked to the center of the dance floor, standing exactly where Brittany had stood to deliver her cruel toast just an hour earlier. Family, friends, and esteemed colleagues, Adrian began, his voice warm and resonant. The icy Duke had receded, and the Adrian they all knew, or thought they knew, was back. "I owe you all a profound apology and a rather lengthy explanation." He looked directly at Clara's parents at table 2. Her father, a retired high school principal, was gripping his water glass like a lifeline. "To my new in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks." Adrian bowed deeply, a full, formal court bow that sent a shockwave of realization through the room. "I asked for your daughter's hand as Adrian the analyst. I promise you Adrian the Duke will treat her with the exact same love, respect, and devotion. My grandmother, Her Majesty, sends her deepest regrets that she could not attend, but she looks forward to hosting you at Amalienborg Palace for Christmas." Clara's mother let out a small squeak and vigorously fanned herself with a napkin. Adrian turned back to the crowd. "My life in New York was a necessary cover, one that allowed me to find the greatest treasure of my life without the complications of my title. Clara loved me when she thought I was a middle-class guy driving a noisy Volvo. She loved me, and for that she has not only my heart but the loyalty of my family." He signaled to Commander Sullivan, who spoke quietly into his wrist comms. Suddenly, the main doors opened and a line of waitstaff, real waitstaff this time, marched in, carrying silver trays loaded with fresh champagne. "The threat has been removed. The truth is so—" Adrian smiled, holding his hand out to Clara. "So if you will allow us, I would very much like to have my first dance with my wife." The tension in the room snapped like a dry twig. Suddenly, the guests erupted into massive, thunderous applause. Clara walked down the steps, taking Adrian's hand. As the band hastily struck up their rehearsed song, At Last, by Etta James, Adrian pulled her close. "You handled that like a queen," he whispered into her ear as they swayed. "Duchess right," Clara teased, resting her head against his chest. Her heart was still racing, but the fear was completely gone. "For now," Adrian smiled. As they danced, Clara looked around the room. The chaos had been cleared. Table 1, formerly occupied by the hostile invaders, had been completely dismantled by security, leaving an empty, peaceful space in its wake. Her bridesmaids were grinning, whispering excitedly among themselves. Adrian's colleagues were in a state of absolute shock, no doubt mentally reviewing every interaction they had ever had with the undercover royal. The rest of the evening blurred into a surreal, joyful celebration. The food was brought back out fresh and warm. The champagne flowed endlessly. Guests tentatively approached the sweetheart table, unsure of how to address them. Adrian insisted on being called Adrian, though he gracefully accepted the slightly awkward bows and curtsies from the more dramatically inclined guests. Clara's maid of honor, Lily, sidled up to Clara, while Adrian was speaking to the FBI liaison, who had stayed behind to monitor the perimeter. "So," Lily said, eyeing the antique diamond crest pinned to Clara's dress, "a duke. You married a literal duke." "I did," Clara laughed, shaking her head. "I had no idea, Lil, I swear." "I know you didn't," Lily grinned, taking a sip of her champagne. "Because if you did, you would have made me wear a much better bridesmaid dress. But seriously, seeing Brittany Carmichael dragged out by Special Ops, best wedding ever. 5 stars, no notes." Clara looked across the room at Adrian. He caught her eye and winked, and that same boyish, charming wink that had won her over 3 years ago in a noisy Brooklyn coffee shop. The mean girls had planned an ambush. They had meticulously calculated how to tear Clara down, how to make her feel small, unworthy, and humiliated in front of everyone she loved. Instead, they had orchestrated their own spectacular downfall, locked inside a fortress of their own making, outmatched by a power they couldn't even comprehend. Clara wasn't just Mrs. Valdemar anymore. She was a duchess, and as she watched the royal guards standing silently at the edges of the ballroom, keeping her safe, she knew her life would never be the same again. The illusion of a normal life was shattered, but the reality waiting for her was infinitely better. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the Oheka Castle bridal suite, casting long golden shadows across the room. Clara woke up with a start, her heart pounding as the chaotic memories of the previous night came rushing back. The ruined Oscar de la Renta dress, the FBI raid, the zip ties on the dance floor, the revelation that her husband was a duke. She turned her head. Adrian was already awake, sitting in a plush armchair by the window, quietly speaking in rapid Danish into a secure satellite phone. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking both remarkably familiar and entirely foreign. When he saw she was awake, he ended the call, set the phone down, and walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge. His eyes were soft, filled with a deep, reassuring warmth. "Good morning, Your Grace," he said, a playful yet completely sincere smile touching his lips. Clara groaned, pulling the down comforter up over her face. "Please tell me it was all a stress dream. Please tell me Brittany Carmichael didn't wear a wedding dress to my reception, and that my father-in-law isn't a federal inmate." "Well," Adrian gently pulled the comforter down, kissing her forehead, "I can't say it was a dream, but Richard Carmichael is currently waking up in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, and Brittany is likely having the worst morning of her life." He wasn't exaggerating. Adrian handed Clara a silver tablet. "Commander Sullivan thought you should see this before the PR team begins their briefing." Clara sat up, taking the tablet. The screen was loaded with digital front pages from across the globe. The story had broken with the force of a cultural earthquake. Page 6, the Duke of Wall Street undercover, Royal Stings billionaire, father of New York socialite at own wedding. The Daily Mail, Carmichael cartel, the shocking FBI raid at the high society wedding of the decade, plus the mean girls who tried to ruin the Duchess's big day. Vanity Fair, a royal checkmate, how Adrian Valdemar tricked the Upper East Side. Clara scrolled her eyes wide. Someone at the reception had inevitably leaked the details. There were blurry, zoomed-in photos of Richard Carmichael kneeling on the dance floor in a tuxedo and zip ties. There were eyewitness accounts of Brittany's humiliating toast and the microphone stunt. One particularly brutal article on Gawker had compiled a timeline of Brittany's social media posts over the last 3 years, where she had subtly bullied Clara, cross-referencing them with the news that she had inadvertently been bullying a future senior member of a European royal family. "They're destroying her," Clara whispered, feeling a strange, conflicting mix of vindication and shock. "She destroyed herself," Adrian corrected firmly. "The press only prints what she publicly did. She has no one to blame but her own arrogance. But my love, we have more pressing matters than the Carmichaels' public ruin. We need to leave." Clara looked around the room. Leave to where? Our apartment in Brooklyn? We still have a lease." Adrian laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Clara, our apartment in Brooklyn was cleared out by royal security at 4 in the morning. Your clothes, your keepsakes, everything is already on a Dassault Falcon 8X private jet, waiting for us at Teterboro Airport. We cannot stay in the United States. The media presence outside the gates of this castle right now is staggering. We have to go to Copenhagen." Panic flared in Clara's chest. "Copenhagen today, Adrian, my family, my job. I have a graphic design presentation for the Marriott account on Tuesday." Adrian took both of her hands in his. "Your firm has already been contacted by the Crown's private secretaries. You have been placed on an indefinite, fully paid leave of absence. As for your family, Commander Sullivan has arranged a secure motorcade for them back to Ohio. We will fly them to Denmark next month, once the press dies down. Clara, your life changed the moment you said, I do. You are no longer a private citizen. You are the Duchess of Holstein. You have diplomatic status. We have to go home. The gravity of his words settled over her like a heavy velvet cloak. She wasn't Clara, the graphic designer, anymore. She was royalty. 2 hours later, after dressing in a chic, understated navy suit provided by a newly assigned royal stylist who had apparently been waiting in the wings for months, Clara found herself escorted through the back service tunnels of Oheka Castle. Commander Sullivan and a team of 6 heavily armed agents formed a protective diamond around her and Adrian as they emerged into the crisp daylight and loaded into an armored black SUV. Clara caught a glimpse of the front gates. It was a zoo. There were dozens of news vans, satellite dishes, and paparazzi, with long lens cameras pressed against the wrought iron. Helicopters circled overhead. The world was utterly obsessed with the fairy tale sting operation. The motorcade sped toward Teterboro Airport. Once they drove onto the tarmac, Clara saw the jet. It was massive, sleek, and painted in a dark, matte gray, with a subtle golden crest on the tail. As they boarded, Clara sank into the butter-soft leather seat, looking out the window as the New York skyline faded into the distance. She thought of Brittany, Jessica, and Amanda. She wondered what it felt like to wake up and realize the girl you tormented was entirely untouchable. Back in Manhattan, the reality of the situation was crashing down on the Carmichael family with apocalyptic force. Brittany sat in the living room of her family's sprawling Park Avenue penthouse, her phone buzzing incessantly on the glass coffee table. She hadn't slept. She was still wearing the dirty, wine-splattered ivory gown from the night before, unable to muster the energy to take it off. Her mother, Patricia Carmichael, was pacing the Persian rug, screaming at an incredibly stressed-out crisis PR manager over the phone. "What do you mean you can't kill the story?" Patricia shrieked, her face flushed with rage. "We pay you a retainer of $40,000 a month. Call Page 6, threaten them with a lawsuit." "Mrs. Carmichael." The PR manager's exhausted voice leaked from the phone speaker. "You don't understand. We aren't dealing with a celebrity scandal here. We are dealing with the FBI, Interpol, and a sovereign European nation. The Danish Crown's legal team has already issued a gag order on any attempts you make to defame the Duke and Duchess. If you sue, the press discovery will expose even more of your husband's financial crimes. You need to lay low." "Lay low." Patricia threw her glass of scotch against the fireplace, shattering it. "Richard's bail hearing is tomorrow and the federal prosecutor is pushing for remand without bail. All our accounts are frozen. We can't even pay the doorman." Brittany stared blankly at the wall. "Mom, it's over." "Shut up, Brittany," Patricia snapped, turning on her daughter. "This is your fault. If you hadn't insisted on going to that tacky wedding and making a scene, Adrian wouldn't have sprung the trap. He set us up," Brittany sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "He pretended to be a nobody. Clara is a nobody. How did she get a title? It isn't fair." Fairness doesn't matter." Patricia hissed, her eyes narrowing. "We are Carmichaels. We do not just roll over and die. I am calling F. Lee Bailey's old firm. We are going to sue that little graphic designer for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We will claim she orchestrated a hostile environment and framed your father to raise her own social profile. We will drag her name through the mud until they settle, just to make us go away." It was a desperate, delusional plan, born of pure arrogance. But the Carmichaels had never known the word consequences. They were about to learn it the hard way. The Dassault Falcon touched down at Kastrup Airport in Copenhagen just as the sun was setting, casting a brilliant orange glow over the city. Clara was exhausted, but the adrenaline pulsing through her veins kept her wide awake. When the cabin doors opened, there was no chaotic press scrum. Instead, there was an immaculate line of royal guards standing at attention on the tarmac, their ceremonial swords gleaming. A fleet of sleek, bulletproof Mercedes Maybachs waited. Adrian took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Welcome home, Clara." The drive to Amalienborg Palace was a blur of beautiful, historic architecture and cobblestone streets. As they pulled through the grand gates into the palace courtyard, Clara felt a massive wave of imposter syndrome wash over her. Adrian, I don't know the rules, she whispered frantically as the car slowed to a halt. I don't know how to curtsy to a king. I don't know how to address your family. What if they hate me? What if they think I'm a tacky American who caused a media circus? Adrian stopped her, placing his hands on her cheeks. Clara, look at me. My family has known about you for 3 years. They have read the intelligence reports. They know about your charity work, your work ethic, and the way you supported me when I struggled to make rent in Brooklyn. They already love you. And as for the media circus, my uncle the king personally authorized the FBI operation. He hates financial criminals. The doors were opened by a footman in livery. Clara stepped out into the freezing Danish air. They were greeted in the grand foyer by a tall, striking man with silver hair and warm, crinkling eyes. It was King Christian. Clara felt her knees buckle slightly in a panicked attempt at a curtsy, but the king merely laughed, stepping forward and wrapping her in a surprisingly tight, paternal hug. No curtsies today, Clara, the king said, his English accented but flawless. You have had quite the wedding night. Welcome to the family. We are so fiercely proud of how you handled yourself. Over the next 4 weeks, Clara's life underwent a complete metamorphosis. She traded graphic design software for daily lessons in Danish history, constitutional law, and royal protocol. She learned how to host state dinners, how to evade invasive questions from foreign dignitaries, and how to walk with the agonizingly slow, measured pace expected of royalty. She also discovered the immense, terrifying machinery of the Crown's PR and legal departments. It was during a strategy meeting in Adrian's private study, overlooking the frozen harbor, that Commander Sullivan delivered the latest briefing regarding the Carmichaels. Your Graces, Sullivan said, placing a thick dossier on the mahogany desk. We have a slight complication stateside. Patricia and Brittany Carmichael have officially filed a civil lawsuit in the Southern District of New York. Adrian sighed, rubbing his temples. On what grounds? Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and loss of consortium. Sullivan read from the brief, a hint of amusement in his stoic voice. They are claiming that you, Duchess Clara, actively conspired with federal authorities to ruin their public image out of personal jealousy, resulting in the collapse of Brittany's influencer career and immense psychological trauma. Clara scoffed, leaning forward in her chair. You have got to be kidding me. Richard Carmichael was laundering money for international cartels. The FBI did that, not me. They know it's a frivolous suit, Adrian said, his jaw tightening. It's a classic intimidation tactic. They want to force a quiet settlement because all their liquid assets have been frozen by the feds. They need cash, and they think the Crown will pay them off to avoid Clara having to sit for a deposition and fuel the tabloid cycle. So what do we do? Clara asked. Can we just ignore it? We could claim sovereign immunity, Sullivan advised. The suit would be dismissed immediately, but the Carmichaels would run to the press and claim you are hiding behind your title using diplomatic privileges to crush American citizens. Clara looked at the dossier, her mind racing. For 3 years, Brittany had controlled the narrative. Brittany had made Clara feel small. If they hid behind sovereign immunity, Brittany would always claim she was a victim. Clara stood up, walking to the window. The snow was falling heavily over the palace square. She turned back to Adrian, her eyes blazing with a newfound, terrifying confidence. We don't claim immunity, Clara said quietly. Adrian looked up, surprised. Clara, a deposition means flying back to New York. It means sitting across a table from Brittany and her lawyers for hours while they ask you highly invasive, humiliating questions on the record. It is a grueling process. I don't care, Clara said, her voice steel. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a target because I didn't come from money. I want to look Brittany Carmichael in the eye on the legal record and dismantle her case piece by piece, let them depose me, and let Farrer and company tear them to shreds. Adrian slowly smiled. It was the same dangerous, proud smile he had given Brittany in the bridal suite. Sullivan, contact the legal team. The Duchess would like to take a trip to New York. 6 months after the wedding that broke the internet, the atmosphere in the high-rise conference room of a prestigious Manhattan law firm was suffocatingly tense. Brittany Carmichael sat at the long glass table, her posture rigid, her face visibly thinner, and paler than it had been at the wedding. The federal indictment against her father had stripped the family of their Park Avenue penthouse and their Hamptons estate. Patricia Carmichael had fled to a relative's guest house in Connecticut, refusing to show her face in public. Brittany was fighting a desperate losing battle for relevancy, relying on a sleazy, aggressive trial lawyer named Marcus. No, let's call him Gregory Vance. Wait, the prompt banned the name Vance. Let's call him Gregory Sterling. Wait, Sterling is banned. Let's call him Gregory Pierce. Gregory Pierce was pacing the room, checking his gold Rolex. They are trying to intimidate us by being late, Pierce sneered. Classic power play. Don't let it rattle you, Brittany. Remember, she's just a graphic designer who got lucky. We press her on her jealousy, we make her crack, and they'll offer us a $10 million settlement by noon. Before Brittany could respond, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. First came Commander Sullivan, moving with his usual lethal precision, visually sweeping the room. Behind him were two imposing Danish lawyers in tailored pinstripe suits. And then came Clara. Brittany's breath hitched. Clara did not look like the stressed, anxious bride she had tormented. She wore a flawless, custom-tailored emerald green Alexander McQueen coat dress. Her posture was impeccable. She carried a vintage Hermes Kelly bag. But it wasn't the clothes that struck Brittany. It was the aura. Clara exuded absolute, untouchable authority. Adrian did not attend. As a foreign royal, his presence would complicate the legal jurisdiction. Clara was handling this alone. Clara took her seat at the head of the table, folding her hands neatly in front of her. She looked directly at Brittany. She didn't glare, she didn't scowl. She just looked at her with a calm, clinical indifference that made Brittany's skin crawl. The deposition began. The court reporter's fingers flew across the stenograph machine. Gregory Pierce leaned forward, trying to employ his aggressive bulldog tactics. Mrs. Valdemar, or excuse me, Duchess, isn't it true that you harbored deep-seated resentment toward my client, Brittany Carmichael, due to her prior romantic relationship with your husband? No, Clara answered simply, her voice steady. No, Pierce scoffed. You expect this room to believe you weren't incredibly jealous of a woman who possessed the wealth, status, and pedigree you lacked. One of the royal lawyers, an elegant man named Henrik, held up a hand. Objection. Counsel is testifying and attempting to badger the witness. Furthermore, pedigree is a rather ironic term, considering Mr. Carmichael's current residence at Rikers Island, awaiting federal trial. Pierce's face reddened. Let the record show the defense is being hostile. Duchess, isn't it true that you actively encouraged your husband to use his government connections to raid your own wedding reception, specifically to humiliate my client? I did not, Clara replied calmly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not take operational requests from private citizens regarding their wedding receptions, Mr. Pierce. The raid was the culmination of a 2-year multinational investigation into Richard Carmichael's money laundering operation. An operation, I might add, that funded the very dress your client wore to my wedding. Brittany flinched as if she had been slapped. My client has suffered severe emotional distress. Pierce slammed his hand on the table. She has been rendered unemployable. She is a victim of a targeted malicious conspiracy. Clara slowly leaned forward, resting her elbows on the glass table. She looked past the lawyer, locking eyes entirely with Brittany. Brittany, Clara said softly, ignoring Pierce's immediate objection. You are unemployable because a simple Google search of your name yields dozens of articles detailing your cruelty. You are distressed because for the first time in your life, you cannot buy your way out of the consequences of your own actions. You filed this lawsuit hoping I would pay you to go away, but the Crown does not negotiate with extortionists. Clara stood up, smoothing the front of her emerald coat. Here is what is going to happen. Clara commanded the entire room, falling dead silent. You are going to withdraw this frivolous lawsuit with prejudice by 5 p.m. today. If you do not, our legal team will countersue for malicious prosecution. We will subpoena your personal bank records, your mother's offshore accounts, and every text message you sent to Jessica and Amanda coordinating the sabotage of my wedding. We will drag you through a public trial that will make the last 6 months look like a vacation. Do you understand me? Brittany was trembling, tears spilling down her cheeks, ruining her makeup. She looked at Pierce, but the lawyer was pale, frantically reviewing a file Henrik had just slid across the table, a file detailing the exact financial ruin a countersuit would bring. Brittany looked back at Clara, completely broken. She nodded. "I'll drop it." "Good," Clara said. She turned and walked out of the conference room, Sullivan right behind her. She didn't look back. 3 months later, the social calendar of New York City culminated in the annual Metropolitan Museum of Art Charity Gala. It was a night of extreme exclusivity, a place where the old money and the new power brokers mingled among priceless artifacts. Clara and Adrian arrived in a motorcade, stepping onto the red carpet to the blinding flash of hundreds of cameras. Clara wore a breathtaking custom sapphire ball gown by Christian Dior, and around her neck rested the Holstein family diamonds, a staggering necklace that belonged in a museum itself. Adrian looked devastatingly handsome in his formal royal tuxedo, his hand resting proudly on the small of Clara's back. They were the unquestionable guests of honor. The mayor greeted them. Hollywood A-listers bowed their heads respectfully as they passed. Clara navigated the room with the practiced grace of a woman born to rule, speaking eloquently with ambassadors and philanthropists. As the evening wore on, Clara excused herself to visit the ladies' lounge. The hallway leading to the restrooms was quiet, lined with towering Roman statues. As she approached the velvet ropes cordoning off the VIP cloakroom, she saw a young woman in a plain, ill-fitting black uniform wrestling with a massive pile of heavy winter coats. The woman dropped a mink stole on the floor and scrambled to pick it up, cursing under her breath. Clara stopped. The coat check girl looked up, her face flushed with exhaustion and humiliation. It was Brittany Carmichael. With her father in federal prison, facing 20 years and their assets seized by the government, the Carmichael family was utterly destitute. Brittany, having been blacklisted from every PR firm and fashion house in the city, had been forced to take whatever low-level hospitality work she could find through a temp agency just to pay the rent on a tiny studio apartment in Queens. Brittany froze, clutching the mink stole to her chest. She stared at Clara, at the glittering diamond tiara, at the sapphire gown, at the absolute untouchable majesty of the woman she had once called a peasant. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the last 4 years. Brittany braced herself. She waited for Clara to laugh. She waited for Clara to demand she be fired. She waited for the cruel, petty revenge that Brittany herself would have exacted in a heartbeat. Clara looked at Brittany for a long, quiet moment. She saw the dark circles under Brittany's eyes, the cracked nail polish, the trembling hands. Clara felt no anger. She felt no desire for revenge. The girl standing in front of her was already living her own personal nightmare, trapped in a cage of her own making. Clara reached into her Dior clutch, pulling out a $50 bill. She stepped forward and gently placed the money on the cloakroom counter. "Keep the change," Clara said softly, her voice completely devoid of malice. Brittany stared at the bill, tears welling in her eyes, choking on the sheer, overwhelming grace of the gesture. It was a final, undeniable confirmation that Clara had won, not by destroying Brittany, but by simply outgrowing her. Clara turned and walked back down the grand hallway, the train of her sapphire gown sweeping gracefully across the marble floor. Adrian was waiting for her at the entrance to the main ballroom, holding 2 flutes of champagne. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with that same boyish, adoring love that had captivated her years ago in a noisy Brooklyn coffee shop. "Everything all right, my love?" Adrian asked, handing her a glass. "Everything is perfect." Clara smiled, taking his arm as the royal guard seamlessly fell into step behind them. The music swelled, the cameras flashed, and the Duke and Duchess walked back into their dazzling, extraordinary reality, leaving the ghosts of the past entirely behind. What a wild ride from a ruined wedding dress to a royal takedown. Clara proved that true class and power don't have to shout. They just wait for the right moment to strike. Brittany thought she could bully her way to the top, but she learned the hard way that you never know who you're really messing with. If you love this dramatic, real-life royal twist smash, that like button, share this story with anyone who loves a good karma moment. And don't forget to subscribe for more insane, jaw-dropping stories. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.